Okay, the next chapter in The Clue in the Crumbling Wall in our Nancy Drew Mystery series is Chapter 5, Beyond the Wall. Nancy could not see the snake. Bess was so horrified she could not speak. It was George who found her voice, crying out sharply, "Let go, Nancy, quick!" Startled, the Drew girl released her hold on the crumbling wall and dropped to the ground. Picking herself up, she gazed questioningly at the girls. "Just see what was making for you," Bess quivered, still shaken from the close call her friend had had. Dramatically, she pointed to the huge snake. At the sight of it, Nancy shuddered involuntarily. Though a bite from the copperhead would not have been fatal to one in such good health as herself, it would have been painful and required medical attention. "Oh, George, you saved me," she thanked her friend appreciatively. "I should have been more careful. Guess I'd better not climb the wall." "Those are the most sensible words I've heard you say today," Bess declared with feeling. "Let's get away from the haunted walk before we find ourselves in real trouble." "Yes, let's go back to the car," George added. "I have an appointment in town, and anyway, it may rain." Nancy was reluctant to leave the estate without seeing Heath Castle, but she noticed that clouds were darkening the sky. "All right," she agreed, "but let's come back soon." They retraced their way across the creaking bridge. Try as they would, they could not find the right direction to the main road. "We're probably a long way from the car," George said finally. "I'll climb a tree and see if I can spot it." "Keep an eye out for snakes," Bess advised as she gave her cousin a boost up the trunk of a giant sugar maple. George was as nimble as a monkey. Climbing high among the branches, she shouted that the river was close by, the road far away. "We've wandered a long distance from the car," the girl reported discouragingly. George slid down the tree, pointing out the route they must take to reach the parked automobile. "We'll cut straight through the woods ahead," she announced. "Are you sure we won't get lost?" Bess asked doubtfully. "Just follow little George." Nancy and Bess were quite willing to have her lead the way. She pushed confidently ahead, tramping down the high grass and thrusting aside thorny bushes. But as the going became more difficult, her pace slackened. "I hope you know where you're leading us," Nancy said at last. "It seems to me we're moving in a wide circle." George paused to catch her breath. Her gloomy silence confirmed Nancy's suspicion. Uh-oh. "George, are we lost?" she asked. "I don't know about you," the girl answered ruefully. "Myself, yes." "It's going to rain any minute, too," Bess said, sinking down on a mossy log. "Oh, why did we come to this horrible, gloomy place? Imagine anyone building a home here." "If the roads were open and some shrubs cut down, the estate would be very lovely," Nancy pointed out. "I'd like to live here myself." After resting a few minutes, the girls took a vote on what to do and decided to continue through the woods. Nancy was chosen leader and proved a better pathfinder than George. Before long, she came to some trampled grass. "Now I know where we are," she cried jubilantly. We're near the estate boundary." A few hundred feet farther on, they saw the wall itself and scrambled over it, reaching the shelter of the car just as the first raindrops splashed against the windshield. Fortunately, Nancy was able to get to the paved highway before the side road became a mire of mud. "Let's wear old clothes next time we go to Heath Castle," she said to Bess and George as the girls parted company in River Heights. "And take along snake serum, axes, and lunch," advised George pointedly. Alone, Nancy suddenly recalled that she had invited Lieutenant Masters to dinner at the Drew home that evening. At 7 o'clock, the attractive officer arrived, not wearing a uniform, but looking very feminine and pretty in a blue lace dress. As dinner progressed, Nancy knew from her father's chuckles that the quick repartee that he was enjoying their guest immensely. After a time, the talk became more serious, as mention was made of several famous court cases. Nancy brought up the problem of the Fenimores and the mystery of Floriana and Heath Castle. "I thought that mysterious place would interest you," young Lieutenant Masters said, smiling. "By this time, I suppose you've been to the courthouse, too, and read the Heath will." "Oh, why, no," Nancy confessed. "So far, I've confined my investigations to the estate. Have you read the will?" "No, I've never had time to examine it." Why not do it together? Nancy proposed eagerly. To this, the policewoman promptly agreed, saying that 10 o'clock the next morning would be a convenient time for her to meet the girl at the courthouse. Since Nancy was familiar with legal terms, having read many of her father's papers, the Walter Heath document was easy for her to decipher. Hector Keep was named as sole executor. A quick reading confirmed the story that the entire Heath estate had been bequeathed to Floriana, also known as Flossie Johnson. In the event the estate was not claimed by her within 5 years of Walter Heath's death, the property was to go to the county for a park. One clause in the will held Nancy's attention. It read, quote, "It is my belief and hope that Floriana still lives and will claim the property within the allotted time. She will be able to identify herself in a special way, thus ensuring that no impostor can receive my estate." I wonder what that means, Nancy mused, pointing it out to Lieutenant Masters, who was equally puzzled. I haven't the least idea, said the officer. They went over the document again, but it gave no clue to the special means by which Floriana might establish her identity. Thinking that the dancer's sister, Mrs. Fenimore, might know the answer, they drove to her cottage. Okay, her face pale, she was sitting on the shabby front porch. She was trying without much success to patch a sunsuit of Joan's. "Good morning," Mrs. Fenimore greeted the visitors wanly. She stared anxiously at the policewoman. It's not Joan again." "No, it isn't. I'm happy to report that your little girl is behaving very well. We came to ask you a few questions about your sister, Floriana." She relaxed but spoke wearily. "I'll tell you everything I can. Long ago, I gave up hope that she will ever be found." "Then you believe that your sister may not be living?" Nancy interposed soberly. "No, Flossie must be alive," Mrs. Fenimore replied with quiet conviction. "Otherwise, in all these years, I would have had some word of her death." "Tell us about your sister," urged Lieutenant Masters kindly. "She was younger than you?" "No, Flossie was 7 years older. Our parents died when we were very young, and we lived with an aunt who was pretty strict. I never minded Aunt Matilda's scoldings, but Flossie was high-strung. She took dancing lessons secretly, and when Aunt Matilda punished her for it, she ran away. For several years, Flossie danced wherever she could get an engagement and studied during her spare moments. She changed her name to Floriana. Oh, she worked hard. I never saw anyone more determined to get on in the world." "You saw Floriana often after she became famous?" inquired Lieutenant Masters. "Only now and then, but she wrote to me every week without fail. I was so excited when she became engaged to Walter Heath. It was a secret, so of course I told no one." "So you have no idea why your sister went away?" asked Nancy. "She needed rest, that's all I know. Flossie didn't tell anyone her plans." The speaker's voice had become soft and dreamy. "Could anything have happened between Floriana and Walter Heath to make her unhappy enough to disappear?" speculated Nancy. Mrs. Fenimore shook her head. "Floriana never hinted of such a thing. She was beautiful and talented. He was handsome, wealthy, and very kind. They adored each other. No, I'm sure he had nothing to do with her disappearance." Mention of the deceased estate owner reminded Nancy of the real purpose of her call. Accordingly, she asked Mrs. Fenimore about the strange identification clause in the Heath will. "I wondered myself what that meant when I read it," she replied. "The only thing I could figure out was that Walt and Floriana must have shared a secret." "Do you think Hector Keep might know what it was?" Nancy asked. Mrs. Fenimore's face darkened. "Please don't mention that man's name," she requested sharply. "Don't you like him?" "I detest him. All these years he's pretended to search for Floriana." "Pretended?" "Well, I can't prove it, but I'm sure he's not honest. From the beginning he assumed that Floriana was dead. He made only half-hearted attempts to find her. Now he doesn't even try. And..." Mrs. Fenimore suddenly slumped in her chair. Both Nancy and the policewoman jumped forward to catch her as she fainted. "Water," said the lieutenant tersely. "This has been too much for her." Nancy flew into the kitchen of the little house, returning a moment later with a glass of water. The policewoman had laid the inert victim on the floor of the porch and was taking her pulse. Now she whisked a tiny first aid kit from her pocket, crushed a tablet from it in the palm of her hand, and held it to Mrs. Fenimore's nostrils. In a moment, she revived and was given the water to drink. "It was foolish of me to faint," she said as they assisted her to the couch in the living room. "Perhaps we'd better not talk any more today," suggested Nancy. "I'm all right now," Mrs. Fenimore insisted. "I'd like to talk. Isn't there something we can do to find my sister?" she asked pitifully. "The time's getting so short. In less than 3 weeks the estate will go to the county. I don't care about myself, but Joan needs so many things, and Floriana could give her." "Surely there must be some clue to her whereabouts," Nancy said thoughtfully. "A clever person should be able to find your sister." "If only someone would make an honest effort," Mrs. Fenimore's voice became pleading. "Won't you help me, Miss Drew?" "I'm afraid it's too big of a job for me." "Oh, no, it isn't," Mrs. Fenimore insisted. "I've read about your work. You're the very one to find my sister." "Well, I hardly know what to say," Nancy demurred, glancing toward the policewoman. Lieutenant Masters gazed at the girl with a challenging smile. "Why not say yes?" she asked softly. From the very first I've known that this was a case for you. If you work fast, you may find Floriana in time to save Heath Castle." And that is the end of the chapter. Chapter 5, Beyond the Wall. I hope you enjoyed listening and reading with me. I've definitely enjoyed it. Some interesting new developments in the story.